this computer. Wonderful. And here we are talking about A Course in Miracles Workbook for Students, Lesson 4. I have Kelly with me, and you don't have your book yet, do you?
No, it has not arrived.
Okay. So I'm just going to read from the book, and then we'll have a discussion about it.
Perfect.
So, Lesson 4, these thoughts. So, Lesson 1, I'm just going to quickly do that. Nothing I see in this room means anything. Lesson 2, I have given everything I see in this room all the meaning it has for me. And I won't do this every time, but we had a bit of a break ourselves. Lesson 3, I do not understand anything I see in this room. So lesson 4 is, these thoughts don't mean anything. They are like the things I see in this room, on the street, from the window, in this place. So interesting. Okay, I'm just going to read. Number 1, unlike the preceding ones, these exercises do not begin with the idea for the day. In these practice periods, begin with noting the thoughts that are crossing your mind for about a minute. Then apply the idea to them. If you are already aware of unhappy thoughts, use them as subjects for the idea. Do not, however, select only the thoughts you think are bad. You will find, if you train yourself to look at your thoughts, that they represent such a mixture that, in a sense, none of them can be called good or bad. This is why they do not mean anything.
Okay.
2, I'm happy to read this again. 2, in selecting the subjects for the applications of today's idea, the usual specificity is required. Do not be afraid to use good thoughts as well as bad. None of them represent your real thoughts, which are being covered up by them. The good ones are but shadows of what lies beyond, and shadows make sight difficult. The bad ones are blocks to sight and make seeing impossible. You do not want either. Number 3, this is a major exercise and will be repeated from time to time in somewhat different form. The aim here is to train you in the first steps towards the goal of separating the meaningless from the meaningful. It is a first attempt in the long-range purpose of learning to see the meaningless as outside of you and the meaningful within. It is also the beginning of training your mind to recognize what is the same and what is different. Number 4, in using your thoughts for application of the idea for today, identify each thought by the central figure or event it contains. For example, this thought about my glasses case does not mean anything. It is like the things I see in this room, on this street, and so on. 5, you can also use the idea for a particular thought that you recognize as harmful. This practice is useful, but not a substitute for the more random procedures to be followed for the exercises. Do not, however, examine your mind for more than a minute or so. You are too inexperienced as yet to avoid a tendency to become pointlessly preoccupied. 6, further, since these exercises are the first of their kind, you may find the suspension of judgment in connection with thoughts particularly difficult. Do not repeat these exercises more than 3 or 4 times during the day. We will return to them later. And those are our lessons. Do you have any questions? Because you don't have this material in front of you. Anything you want me to read again?
Per day. No, I've written down the lesson number 4.
Okay.
So 3 to 4 times per day, which is building on the first ones, which were, either the beginning or at the end of the day. So we're kind of getting a little bit more intensified with the amount of times that we kind of recognize these things.
Right. And we may go back to morning and night.
Right.
I don't recall actually, but we might go back. But for this particular lesson, I think it's important to remember that we're concentrating on the thoughts that come and not deciding if they're good or bad, and really just saying these thoughts do not mean anything.
Yeah, it makes sense because we're Whereas the other ones you had to look around and say, well, this clock means nothing, and or it doesn't mean anything, and this picture doesn't mean anything. It's very different than actually having thoughts that come in your head on a consistent, constant basis.
Yeah.
So that makes more sense to me now that I've kind of thought that through.
And also, we don't think about our thoughts.
No.
They're just there, right? We've always just sort of had them.
Yeah.
So, I'm tired today, but did I have a thought I'm tired today, or am I just tired?
Right. Yeah. Probably happens more if you think something that's negative, because then you kind of almost catch yourself and think, oh, I shouldn't have thought that, or I shouldn't
Right.
think that way, or things like that. So it needs to have a little bit more neutrality to it and just let it go.
And we also gave it meaning by saying we shouldn't have had those thoughts, or
Right.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So did you write down the thing we're supposed to say? This thought about
These thoughts
does
don't mean
does
anything.
does not mean anything. It is
Mm-hmm.
like the things I see in this room, on the street, out the window, whatever we have in that in this place.
Yep.
So that means we could really do it anywhere, driving in the car.
Yes, and that's, I think, most thoughts when I'm driving.
Do you?
Yeah, a lot. And usually I'm listening to
Cool.
something, and that will kind of spark, um, either just I feel like an enlightenment or a download of some kind, or just random kind of a thought that just reminds you of something.
Right. Huh.
So we just go out from our core center in this room onto the street, out into the greater whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In this place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in this case, since we'll be doing it a few times today,
Mm-hmm.
it could be wherever you are. Whereas the other ones, I think we're kind of like morning and evening. Well, we generally, most people,
Mm-hmm.
would be at home,
Right.
probably in the morning and the evening, whatever
Yeah.
your morning and evening would be.
Mm-hmm.
Do not be afraid to use good thoughts as well as bad. None of them represent your real thoughts, which are being covered up by them. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Like, read that one more time.
Do not be afraid to use good thoughts as well as bad. None of them represents your real thoughts, which are being covered up by them.
See,
The
when you
good
say,
ones, go ahead.
um, don't be afraid to use your thoughts, I've never even considered using
Right.
my thoughts, right? Just that framing of that concept is like, interesting, because if you use words, that's one thing, because you can use words to hurt somebody or to make somebody feel good, but
Yeah.
your thoughts are kind of only within your own mind.
Yeah.
And so I guess, are you using them to build yourself up or to tear yourself down?
Right. And
But if
maybe
you
what
don't
are they
mean
covering
anything,
up?
exactly.
And then it says, the good ones are but shadows of what lies beyond, and shadows make sight difficult. The bad ones are blocks to sight and make seeing impossible. You do not want either.
Hmm.
So that's
So,
like reiterating we don't want to we want to recognize our thoughts
mhm.
and recognize whatever thought it is doesn't mean anything, because we don't want to even say it's good or bad, because that attaches meaning to it. And then either way, we have a shadow. So we don't want either.
So, are we supposed to keep our mind like clear from anything coming in?
Good question. I
Right.
don't know.
It feels like I'm trying to create a blank canvas.
Right. I think it's just recognizing when we have thoughts, like go
Mm,
about your day.
yeah.
I thought about, I need to get out of the house. That's what I had that thought today. I
Yeah.
hadn't read this material, of course.
Hmm.
I Do I want to get out of the house, or do I have to get out of the house today?
Right. Hmm.
Kind of feels like I have to. So that would have been a good, not judging it,
Hmm.
but that's a thought. And if it's a I can't decide if that would be a good thought or a bad thought. It's just a thought.
Mm-hmm.
So is it?
I guess it depends on the outcome of going outside, right?
Well, and that's meaningless too.
If you take in all the beautiful air and see all the bunnies and the deer, that's great. If you slip and break a hip, that was a shitty thought. You
But
know?
see, we're acting on those thoughts. These are just thoughts.
Right.
These thoughts do not mean anything. So we can't even bring in the consequence of our thoughts yet.
Okay.
I don't
Interesting.
know. That's just my thought.
No, well,
Interesting, right?
yes, it is. I don't actually. I'm trying to think about how I feel about this information, right? Because there's parts of it I think, okay, what's happening here?
Right?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yes. So lesson one was nothing I see anywhere means anything. Lesson two, I have given everything I do see in this room all the meaning it has for me. Lesson three, I do not understand anything I see in this room. And lesson four, these thoughts do not mean anything.
Hmm.
And maybe we don't need to dig so deep because we have 361 lessons that are going to build on this foundation.
Oh, good.
Oh, and number three, it does say this is a major exercise and will be repeated from time to time in somewhat different form. The
Okay.
aim here is to train you in the first steps towards the goal of separating the meaningless from the meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
It is a first attempt in a long-range purpose of learning to see the meaningless as outside of you and the meaningful within, which we know. We know in
Yeah.
our conscious thought that that is the case, but this is interesting. It is also the beginning of training your mind to recognize what is the same and what is different. I don't even know what that means.
Hmm.
This thought about what we just talked about does not mean anything. So then we can unhook from having that needing to mean something. And it can just be, well, I had that thought.
Mm-hmm. Feels kind of, I
I
don't know.
know.
Feels it has a hollow feeling to it.
That's your thought.
Yeah.
Is it meaningless outside or meaningful within? Is it what? Yeah. I
Well,
think
it's
it's just
certainly
creating
making me
awareness.
think. Yes,
So,
exactly. I agree with that. It is creating awareness. But
yeah.
it's interesting if you try to, you know, think too much about that thought. I feel like I'm going around in circles. I'm losing my mind.
I totally understand because we are looking at our thoughts and thinking out loud at all the same time. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit convoluted, but we're going to just trust the process.
Mm-hmm.
In these practice periods, begin with noting the thoughts that are crossing your mind for about a minute. So when you have a minute,
Mm-hmm.
just think about the thoughts that are crossing your mind. Then apply the idea to them. So no analysis, no judgment, um, no nothing.
Just let
Just
them come in and
acknowledge
go out.
your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Weird, weird and hard. And we've made it hard. We've made it easy. We've
Well,
made it
just
more than it should be.
yeah, I wish I was 10 years old, right? So this would be much more easy. I would have less, 48 years less programming.
Right?
Yeah.
And questions. It's really, let's just make it simple.
Mm-hmm.
These thoughts do not mean anything.
Yeah.
They are like the things I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place. Does not mean anything. Our thoughts don't mean anything. It is a first attempt in the long-range purpose, see, I did it again, purchase, of learning to see the meaningless as outside of you and the meaningful within. It's also the beginning of training your mind to recognize what is the same and what is different.
But even a meaningful thought wouldn't mean anything.
No, there are no meaningful thoughts
Hmm.
because these thoughts do not mean anything.
I think I'm getting a headache.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
yeah,
So,
it is. Well, I like it. It's good.
yes. So, yeah, I'm going to close it here,
Hmm.
close or stop the recording.